Hey guys, this is Christian from Tailwaters Fly Fishing in Dallas, and today we're going to do a pattern walkthrough of Fly Fish Foods Jiggy Fat Minnow. I believe Cheech has created a bunch of variations of this, and I think it's a really good bass fly, white bass fly, especially this time of the year, and thought that it would be a great one to tie at fly tying night, which is tomorrow night, depending on when you're watching this. But after a long break, we're gonna be back in the saddle, tying some flies here at the shop, and we're excited. So let's get to it. Okay, guys, we're gonna walk through the Jiggy Fat Minnow here, starting with an Arex size 6 jigged barbless hook, the Arex mini jig, and then we've got a 3/16 slotted tungsten bead, and then we're gonna use I think Cheech used 0.35. I'm going to use 0.20 because it's what I have. Lead-free round wire. And the first thing we're going to do is pull off, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches of lead-free round wire. And we're just going to wrap this right behind the bead. Just like that. I like to make my wraps as tight to each other as I can, and what this is really going to do, it's going to help lock that bead in once we get some thread on it. Don't need a bunch of wraps, just 6 or 7, and then kind of take your thumb and press those tag ends real nice, and then we're just going to shove that lead right into the back of the bead, and that's going to butt it up to the eye of our hook. And then I'm using 140 Vivas white thread. I'm just going to lay a thread base down and lock in that lead wire. When I get to about here, I'm going to just push it a little closer to that bead and come all the way right to the bend of the hook, right about there. Now, before I move on, I'm going to hit a little bit of super glue right on those lead wire wraps just to make sure that they don't go anywhere, move while we're fishing. This fly is great for creeks and fishing white bass, especially in the Texas area. A lot of times our creeks are very shallow, and then we'll get to a pool that's, can be 8 to 10 feet deep. So we're just going to put a little bit of super glue on there, make sure she doesn't go anywhere. And then our next step is we're going to use Extra Select Marabou. Again, Cheech used, I believe, white chickaboo. I'm going to use what I have, and what I have is Extra Select Marabou. So we're going to pull a feather that looks good. That one looks good to me. Off of our strung marabou. And what we're looking for here is something that has a pretty nice spread, has some body to it, but mainly when I collapse that, it kind of gives us this this tail of a bait fish profile. Now, sometimes you would pull out this middle piece of the feather. I'm going to leave it for this fly. I think it resembles the original chickaboo as close as we can get, so that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to get rid of that excess, and I'm going to size this to my fly. I want about 2 hook lengths back, and I think that's going to give us a pretty nice tail there. So I'm just going to lay this right on top. I'm going to place a loose wrap or 2, and then I'm going to go ahead and tighten down. I'm going to wrap back, and that's going to give us a nice little tail. Okay, cut off my excess, and I'm just going to wrap it down. Okay, so the next step to this fly, it's a super simple little creative fly, something that you can tie a bunch of pretty quickly. So we're going to use some ripple ice fiber or ripple ice dub, and the color is Mother of Pearl. It's got a ton of sheen and a ton of sparkle. One thing to remember when you're using any type of dubbing is less is more. So even an amount like that is probably more than I need, but we can pull off some excess. What I'm going to do I'm going to use a little bit of dubbing wax here and just lightly wax my thread to get it to stick to that dubbing. And if you don't have a Norvise, can't use the cool dubbing tool, but I'm going to dub just like how you should on any vise. I'm going to just kind of rub that in with my fingers. Doesn't have to be perfect. This kind of just gives this fly a little bit of glow on the underbelly. That looks about right to me. It's probably way too much, but hey. We're just going to wrap that forward, kind of trapping some of those fibers as we go. Right, and see, I've got a little bit of excess, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pull it off of that thread and kind of trap some of those. We're not going to go all the way up to the bead. We need to save a little bit of room for our head on this fly. Something that's important here, and I wasn't prepared, of course, is a little bit of a brush. Kind of like to pull out a little bit of those under fibers on that dubbing, kind of get it to spread into that tail a little bit. I want to be able to see some of it, just like that. Okay, now what we're going to do is start building our head. So the head for this fly, we're going to use a combination of Bruiser Blend Jr. in cream, and then we're going to use Bruiser Blend Jr. in gray. And this fly, because it rides in the water, hook up, we are going to put the white on top and the gray on bottom if your hook is oriented in the vise this direction. Now this stuff goes a long way, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a clump similar to that, and I'm going to try and split some of this somewhere like that. I'm just going to lay that right behind the bead and make one nice wrap on top and one there. And before I blend these two together and pull it back, I'm just going to leave it separated because I need to invert my fly and put a little bit of our gray dubbing on. Now for this one, because we have the hook here, it helps to kind of get your ball of dubbing and kind of split this a little bit. It doesn't have to be too crazy. Okay, and once we have our dubbing split, for the bottom side to go around the hook, I'm just going to place that right in there. I'm just going to loose wrap and grab. And then I like to pull a little bit on this side and check myself to make sure that we're covering if there's any empty gaps here. That looks good on that side. And then we're just going to do one more tight wrap to lock it in. Okay, so now what I can do is I can start pulling this front back and this back. Kind of coerce my thread through there. And I can come right behind the bead. Once we're right behind the bead, I can kind of grab all those fibers, pull them back, give myself a couple of wraps to help me separate from the head. And that is pretty much where we're at. Looks okay. You can grab your brush and brush out some of those trapped fibers, give you a little bit more of a look, and if you're kind of off-centered like I was there, you can kind of get back in there and fix it up. But now the tying portion is pretty much over. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more room here, and I'm going to whip finish. Now it's important to have that little separation between the bead and all your material, because we are going to throw in some little teeny tiny eyes, and we're going to build a little bit of a baitfish head here with some UV. So trim your thread, whip finish. Now then, what we're going to do here is we're going to take some really teeny tiny eyes. These are 1/8 inch 3D holographic eyes, and I've got them pre-cut for our tying night tomorrow. But the easiest way I think to do this, because you're working with something so small, is to have a bodkin handy. Mine's all bent up and tore up, but once you have your bodkin handy, I'm just going to pick off one of these little eyes without getting too much of that paper on there. We pulled that paper. Okay. Get the paper off of there. Then what I'm going to do, so I'm going to take my super glue, I'm going to take my bodkin, and I'm just going to get a little dab and place a small dab on my bodkin. We don't need a whole ton. I mean, that's probably too much. The hardest part here is not sticking the glue to your fingers. I'm going to put my fly sideways like this. And I'm just going to place a little daub of glue right behind the bead and in between all of my materials. And I'm going to grab this little teeny tiny eye, clean off my bodkin so it doesn't stick to that. I'm just going to drop this eye right there. And I'm going to use my bodkin instead of my fingers so it doesn't stick. I'm just going to push this eye into there. Just like this. Okay. Now you can see on that side. Make sure that you're trying to keep as much of that glue off the front of that eye as possible. We don't want to have a haze on it. And then I'm going to do the other side. The benefit to this is, one, we get to hide some of those thread wraps up front and allow you to hide some of your mistakes if you made any. And then two, we're going to cover it in UV anyways, make sure that it's durable and those flies or those eyes stay on while you're fishing them. So grab our little eye. It's like doing surgery with these little tiny guys. And I'm just going to place it on that dubbing. I'm just going to dab it on there and make sure that they're somewhat equal. Okay. So now you're pretty close. You could totally fish this fly like this, put some head cement on it. If you're not familiar with some of the UV products, one, you should be, and you should get familiar with them, but two, they're not necessary. I could put some hard head on this, fish this fly all day long. It's going to do just great. But with sticking with what the original pattern looked like, I'm going to use some Copic markers, and I'm just going to give the belly of this fly, because this fly rides this direction, I'm going to give this belly of this fly a little bit of yellow color from these Copic markers, and I can just barely touch some of that. I can actually use my fingers, kind of rub that in a little bit and help it blend into the material. Put a little bit more. Just give that belly a little bit of a yellow sheen. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, but I'm going to use brown. The underside, you kind of got to pull some of this up. And just give it a little bit of dabbage, and then kind of use your fingers to rub into it. If you need to take it out of the vise, you can to avoid that hook.
I gave on $500.
Okay. So now, the only thing else we have to do is put a gill on this fly. Again, it's one of those things that you absolutely do not have to do. Man, come on. There we go. One of those things that you absolutely don't have to do to make this fly fish, but I think they look really cool. So we are just going to throw a little bit of a gill on here. And again, because this fly rides hook up, we need to do it on the top side, depending on where the fly is oriented in your vise. So I'm just going to put a small line of red on one side, and put a small line of red on the other side. Let that dry before you blend if you're not using the Copic stuff. I'm not, just a regular old red marker. So that looks pretty good. Now comes the fun part. We're going to use a combination of two different thicknesses of UV clear fly finish. I'm going to use thick to help me build up some of that head, and then I'm going to finish the head with some thin. Now you can absolutely, if this is all you have, you can build the head with just this. You just have to do layer by layer and let those layers build on each other. But this will totally work. This just makes it a little quicker and a little bit more efficient. So I'm just going to glob this right behind the bead. Just like that. And I'm going to rotate this all the way around the fly. And I just want to get enough on there to cover the front of those eyes. And then just kind of using the applicator nozzle here to kind of help me spread it out a little bit. Doesn't have to be too clean, it'll kind of settle, right? So that looks okay. Just like that. And then we're going to hit it once it's level with a little bit of a UV light. Just for a couple seconds, let that cure. Okay, that should be close. Oops. Then I'm going to put a little bit of thin on here, make sure that all of our crevices are full and we've got a nice shine on this little head of this minnow. And our bead's not going anywhere. And we should be done. Give that a cure. Both sides of the eyes, make sure they don't go anywhere. That's really it. So this is the Jiggy Fat Minnow. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that you enjoy this fly and catch a bunch of fish on it. I'm no Cheech from Fly Fish Food, but I really think he's a great fly designer, and this fly is really cool. He's got a little bit more of an in-depth video on their YouTube channel. You should definitely go check it out. He kind of talks through working with some different materials, and but yeah, man, I love this fly. I can't wait to catch a bunch of white bass on it and tie it with you guys at our tying night.